Welcome back, everybody. Parenting is challenging, it's frustrating, it's all those things, and that's why ABC4 News at 4 is teamed with Donna Tatro for our Monday and Friday conversations, Kids Under Construction. Together, we're all learning more to be a better parent. She's joining us from LA via Zoom, and also joining us today is Jonathan Schiller, a family law attorney. Now, coming off the heels of National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, Jonathan, let's talk about what do we not know, rather, about domestic violence that we should better understand as a society?
Well, thank you for having me. I think one of the most important things to understand about domestic violence is really what forms of domestic violence exist. Obviously, first to identify the problem, you have to know what it is. Domestic violence, what most people think it's just physical violence, but over the years it's transpired and laws have evolved to where now we recognize domestic violence of all forms of abuse, which are basically the wheel of violence, the power and control, whether that be coercion and threats, intimidation, using emotional abuse, financial abuse, using male privilege in certain cases, using the children as pawns, things of that nature. So in the past, we looked to just strictly kind of physical violence, but now we are dealing with more of the emotional kind of abuse, which has gotten a lot of headway the last few years.
And Jonathan, as family and friends of potential victims, can family and friends help? I mean, is this something that's possible, or do we need to remove ourselves and only contact professionals? What should we be doing if we know that somebody is suffering?
Sure, that's a great question. Obviously, sometimes individuals, family, friends, neighbors, cousins, whatnot can help directly, but in most instances, it's going to be indirect assistance. Unfortunately, victims of domestic violence, if they need to seek some sort of civil relief from the courts or even seek criminal charges through law enforcement, generally those things have to be done on their own individually, unless it's abuse of a child. In that situation, a parent could bring some sort of immediate action to protect the child from some sort of abuse. But in most instances, it's really about, if you see something, you need to say something. You need to look for, obviously, signs of domestic violence, isolation, obviously, bruising on someone's face or body. In those types of situations, contacting, making an anonymous phone call to the hotlines, whether that be the child abuse hotline in your certain area, or contacting law enforcement is one thing that they could be done. Obviously, if you know the victim, you can approach the victim, provide emotional support, financial support. Sometimes one of the things that precludes people from coming forward to protect themselves is the lack of a safety plan. So sometimes having the assistance of a family or friend can help put people in a better position to come forward and get the immediate relief that they really need for themselves and or their family. Another way that you can help is trying to educate and inform. There are many resources, local, state, as well as federal organizations that are dealing with this pandemic that we have. So obviously trying to get as many resources available to someone in need is always helpful. And lastly, trying to help them through the process. Sometimes people are afraid to go to court because they don't understand the rules, the procedures, the rules of law. So, perhaps getting them in contact with an attorney is always a suggested thing, because the one thing that you don't want to do is prevent people from coming forward with the fear of not getting the relief that they're actually entitled to.
Those are some very important points. Thank you for sharing all that part. We talked a bit about the signs in that answer there, but what about the maybe signs that aren't physical but more of an emotional sign? Is there something people should be looking out for when it comes to that?
Absolutely. Obviously there are definitely signs of the emotional abuse. A lot of these cases is a he said, she said situation. So, whether it be preventing cutting someone off financially from the bank account so that they can't leave, isolating them to the home, restricting their access and contact to the outside world, whether it be family, friends, restricting their use to the internet and things of that nature. Those types of actions and those patterns of behavior are now recognized as a form of abuse. And even it's even gotten to the point where those types of a verbal abuse in the presence of a child is also deemed abuse to the child. And we know from scientific research that causes long-term effects for children. So, in the past, we looked at kind of just physical violence, and a lot of the times when you get to court, the courts are looking for some sort of evidence of physical damage or bruising or something to that effect. But in the last 5 to 10 years, in my experience in court, the courts are taking recognition of these forms of abuse, as well as using the children as pawns in these relationships, threatening to take away the children or seek full custody from a parent is also a form of abuse that is now recognized and is part of this wheel of violence that's recognized throughout the country.
Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today. Donna Tetreault, you always bring us such great experts to talk about really difficult conversations, but unfortunately they need to be happening. So Jonathan Schiller, we do appreciate you joining us. We do want to remind everyone that for the local hotline numbers, if you know of someone who needs help, those are always waiting for you online at abc4.com. So we do want to mention that right now. We also want to remind you that Donna's podcast, Kids Under Construction, is waiting for you at abc4.com. You can also send her a question directly to us, kidsunderconstruction at abc4.com. And Donna has so many answers, and if for some reason she doesn't have an answer, as we see here so very often, she has such a great group of friends and experts to join her with us each Monday and Friday. So to both of you, we say thank you very much.